fight against money laundering and terrorism financing, one question continues to spark debate across Africa: how the governments protect national security without shrinking the space for civil society. Here in Abuja, that conversation is taking center stage as Spaces for Change, S4C, has convened the third Africa High-Level Civil Society Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing Conference. Experts, policymakers and civil society leaders from across the continent has gathered to share lessons, examine best practices and chart a new path for reform. Africa, we're experiencing a lot of terrorism acts, money laundering. Africans are known for corruption. What is this discussion all about, and how is it going to positively affect these issues?
The issue on terrorist financing and money laundering has been hyping much more than ever. The understanding also is that CSOs are used mostly to move monies, and they are used also as a cover-up in terms of terrorist financing. And then also there's an understanding that they are also used to recruit people for humanitarian issues. So this third African High-Level Conference was for us to demystify that, also guide the sector as CSOs to know what we should be very careful of, and then we do due diligence in operation. So for those of us who are representing the government, especially the agencies and the sectors that are looking up to it, that the civil society work well, so that their work will complement that of government to impact the family and the generation. We are all present to make our contribution for a very fruitful deliberation.
Okay, so what would you say about people that have the notion that civil society organizations are being sponsored by these acts, monies that are used to operate civil society organizations are coming from this aspect of money laundering, financing and all of that?
No, really, let me mention it. It's just a perception. So they should know that as much as possible, now the sector is much more robust than before. There is a due diligence that is being carried out by every civil society, the source of funding, the worth of the funding, and even the channel by which the funding comes in. So civil societies are much more clever. And then also the regulators are also making sure that education and then also awareness creation of what should look for, what should be very careful of in executing or transacting your business, or even soliciting funding from any other source. So that is not absolute, but then before then some might even fall in it.
Okay, so now in such a conference, what are your expectations, or what are your country's expectations from this conference?
Oh, great. My country's expectation is much more that many of the CSOs we have in this conference are the big ones, are the large ones, even being organized by Spaces for Change with the support. So my country look forward that all these MPOs that will be present here, they get to learn more. Their capacity will be built so that we can perform much more in our area of work to help in our country.
In a conference like this, I know a lot of discussions will go around policymakers and all of that, but from your perspective, what are some of the biggest misconceptions governments have about civil society organizations when it comes to money laundering and terrorism financing risk?
Thank you. We agree that money laundering and terrorism are big threats in Africa here. But the big misconception is that NPOs, or the civil society sector, is vulnerable and can be used at large as a conduit for money laundering and also for financing terrorism in Africa. I think for me that is the biggest misconception. We agree, yes, probably a small section of this group of the NPO sector can be used for financing terrorism, but it shouldn't be for the entire sector, for the entire civil society or the NPO sector in Africa. So for me, that is the biggest misconception. Therefore, that calls for targeted actions by countries, including mine in Uganda, and I think every other country in Africa. So what do we mean by targeted, and how do we get targeted areas of the NPO sector? Through assessments. The countries like Uganda are supposed to do risk assessments and identify those categories of the NPO sector that are vulnerable or that are at risk of being used for financing terrorism, and those should be the organizations that are targeted for regulation, but not just putting a blanket regulation for every NPO actor in the country.
Okay, so moving on, many civil society organizations argue that AML and CFT regulations are increasingly being used to restrict their operations. Okay, so from your perspective, where should the line be drawn between national security and civic freedom?
There's actually a thin line between the misconceptions on ML, money laundering, and CFT, and infringement on civic space.
Okay.
So civic space is where the NPOs operate, is where the civic action is driven, is where people can ask some questions on their own governance in countries.
Yes.
So we've seen governments utilizing regulation for civil society and organizations in the governance space, trying to over-restrict them and stop them from acting or doing their role in terms of civic mobilization. So that's I think, one of the biggest risks we have in Africa today. And I think governments need to be careful as they implement these recommendations and allow the good, legitimate work of the NPO sector in areas including civic organization, in areas including governance, calling for effective, sustainable, and good governance in our countries. So we shouldn't use the regulation and the recommendations against money laundering and financing of terrorism to over-restrict the space for civil society and the NPO sector to operate their legitimate activities. There should be very careful and targeted and well-studied actions that only fish out those areas of civil society or NGOs that actually are liable or can easily be vulnerable to the financing of terrorism in Africa, but not generally for every civil society organization. Actually, many of the organizations in Africa have very strong, in fact, many of the legitimate organizations have stronger requirements internally to guard against the financing of terrorism and money laundering. Okay. So the more we allow such organizations to do their work, the more we actually increase on how, as a country, I mean government, but also all other actors in the fight against terrorism and money laundering in our countries.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well said. Finally, Uganda, what are your expectations? What are your country's expectations from such a gathering as this?
This is our third time coming together across the continent and talking about money laundering and financing of terrorism, and particularly how the NPO sector can work with government.
Yes.
So from this conference, we expect more steps in terms of how we collaborate together as government and the NPO sector to fight these two vices, money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism.
Yes.
So we don't need to fight amongst ourselves. We actually, from this conference, we are going to have steps of how to collaborate and work together even better in terms of stopping or mitigating and minimizing ML and CFT.
several African countries have tightened regulations on NGOs in recent years. Are we seeing a genuine effort to combat financial crimes, or is there a risk of over-regulation?
Thank you very much for having me once again. I will talk as far as Gambia is concerned.
Yes.
In the Gambia, we used to have what we call Decree 81, which does not actually restrict NGOs in doing their work. They have the safe environment, convenient environment to do whatever they feel like doing as far as NGO activities are concerned. But my government does not stop at that. It has come up with a new NGO bill, at least to enhance the operations of, NGOs more, to be more democratic than before. So the bill will not restrict any NGO from its activities. They will operate as usual, of course by law, in accordance with the laws of the country. Yes. And I have strong belief that the bill will further enhance the NGOs to have more say in whatever activities government is doing, because we are in a democratic state. So that bill will help greatly, but it will not definitely restrict NGOs. NGOs. There is no restriction as such, and we don't see it happening anytime soon.
But is there any policy to restrict them so that they don't, go overboard or break laws? Is there any bill that restricts or guides? Should I use the word guides them? Is there like a guiding bill or policy that is guiding them?
Of course, yes. This is the NGO bill I'm talking about. So it is a comprehensive bill that would tell NGOs what they're supposed to do. Okay. But even with the Decree 81 that we are currently using, so when a particular organization comes for registration, in order to access the NGO license in the Gambia, the NGO degree is what they sign, because it has two schedules. We have the first schedule, which talks about the NGO Protocol of Accord, and then the second schedule, which talks about the NGO Code of Conduct. NGOs are given the opportunity to read before they solicit for that NGO license. When they read and understand perfectly what the decree entails, then they come for the license based on being able to satisfy the criteria that we have in place. When they do, when we give them the license at the point of registration, they must sign.
Okay.
And my office will sign on behalf of government that we have agreed. They have agreed to what government has, or they have agreed to the NGO policy in the country. They sign, and then we sign. They go with their copy. We also go with our copy.
Okay, so what lessons can African countries learn from jurisdictions that have successfully balanced security concerns with a vibrant space?
Of course, yes. My country, I think, will have a long way in learning, because countries like Nigeria, for instance, this morning alone, I learned a lot. When it comes to the issue of NGO compliance, for instance, Nigeria, I was here in 2018 to attend a Java meeting. So countries were rated. So my country, the Gambia, and Niger, we are the only countries that we are partially compliant. So all the others were non-compliant, including Nigeria. So I'm back in Abuja, and I realized that Nigeria is now compliant. Not even partially compliant, but compliant. So meaning we are here to learn from how they were able to achieve that compliance. For the simple reason that laws, the policies that they use to be able to have that compliant rating is what my country is here to learn from. Because there must be policies that are in place to make sure that the operations of non-governmental organizations or non-profit organizations is at a particular level, that where it's supposed to be. So it's the same thing that we want in the Gambia, and hopefully it will be achieved.
Thank you very much. So finally, before we let you go, the Gambia, in conferences like this, what are your country's expectations? What are your major take-homes from conferences like this?
We are here to learn. Okay. We know that we are not perfect.
Yes.
And of course, other countries would learn from us because we are partially compliant, and there are still countries that are non-compliant.
Yeah.
So we are here to learn from those that are compliant. That's our target.
Okay.
Unlike Nigeria, thank God, because Nigeria is only in Africa. I think it's only Nigeria and Tunisia that are compliant, as far as I know. So, and then we want to learn from those countries. So Tunisia is not around, or if it is around, it did not attend my session or our session. But Nigeria did, and then they did a presentation which my country would definitely have a good takeaway from.
Spaces for Change has brought together different stakeholders from across Africa. Now, my question is, what gap or challenge did you see, did Spaces of Change see to hold this conference, to hold this meeting?
So the first reason why we're hosting this conference is Africa is indeed having lots of security challenges, especially challenges around terrorism and insurgency and lots of organized crimes. And countries have rolled out measures to deal with these security challenges. But the concern about that is that while we acknowledge that those measures are very necessary in light of the heightened risk, in light of the fatalities, the consequences of the actions of activities of criminal elements, but it is important that those measures are enforced in ways that do not restrict or curtail civic freedoms, in ways that do not securitize the environment, in ways that make it even livability difficult, because you're trying to solve another problem, then you create another problem. And one of the sectors suffering or impacted by some of these countermeasures are the civil society sector, which largely under the umbrella of non-profit organizations.
Yes.
So there are lots of sentiments across governments that suggest that NPOs may be vulnerable to either money laundering or terrorism financing. So that has caused government to increase the measures that they have rolled out to tame the threats that they've seen in the non-profit sector. The essence of this conversation is to look at the evidence, to look at the different practices of countries across West Africa, to say, are there better ways of doing this thing? Are there better ways of enhancing the integrity of financial systems? Are there better ways of improving national security while at the same time protecting civic freedoms? So that is why we're having this conversation, to see how countries can strike that healthy balance that is needed between security and protection of civic freedoms.
Perfect. So today, day one, this is the first day of a 4-day conference. We saw master classes going on. What are the discussions in these master classes?
So there were 4 master classes today. The first is hosted by the NPOs themselves, the non-profit organizations themselves, coming out to share their experiences about how these risks are impacting how the threats and how the countermeasures are impacting their operations. The second was hosted by the regulators, the regulators, that is the law enforcement bodies regulating the non-profit organizations across Africa, where government agencies are looking at how they are regulating the sector, understanding the areas where they fell short and areas of good practice that needs to be scaled up. The third third masterclass was organized by financial institutions, which are gatekeepers of the terrorism financing measures.
Yeah.
And what that means is that the way they are also implementing their measures, the way they open accounts, the way they manage and surveil and monitor accounts, the way they classify accounts, the way they treat transactions generally. They are also looking at how they have looked at their NPO customers over the years, whether they've treated them fairly, whether they've implemented the measures in ways that have made it difficult or lighter for the non-profit. And the last is the FSRBs, which is the FATF style regional bodies. And they are assessors. They are the ones that assess countries' compliance with money laundering, ability to combat money laundering and terrorism financing. So the FSRBs are here to give guidance to countries, to tell them how to strike that balance. Because they are the one going from country to country to country, assessing countries' compliance. So they are here to provide guidance. hear from MPOs, hear from financial institutions, hear from the regulators, and give overall guidance to different sectors.
Okay, and finally, at the end of the 4 days conference, which we'll be speaking to you every day for the next 4 days, at the end of the 4-day conference, what are the results expected?
So the results, we're supposed to see shifts. If you were in the financial institution masterclass, you will hear some banking executives say, I have repented. I used to do it this way, but I know better. I was wrong. Yes. So we want to hear some admissions, acknowledgement of things that went wrong, but it's not just what went wrong, but how do we do it better? So as we are going away, we are going to go away with recommendations, with good practices, with success stories, and we renewed commitment to go back and implement these measures better. While we're safeguarding our countries and our territories, we do not want to make sure that we're sacrificing civic freedoms.
I got to the airport, immigration. He just collected my passport, looked at me and said, bonjour. I said, He said, bonjour. I said, no, man, look very well. Look, I was born in March. Born March, not June. Born March, please. I'm not here alone. I'm here with a friend of mine. This man is, I don't know how to explain it. He's somebody that I'm sure you all want to see. As if people that are not from Nigeria, if it's going to be your first time, count yourself lucky meeting this guy. First time I saw him and I watched him, oh my God, I knew that when God created human beings, He put intelligence in some, put height in some, put knowledge in some, and removed it, all those things from this man. Because even height and the rest, he might not have it. But please put your hands together for the award-winning Sarkin Daria. As I call him, Sakarin Diarrhea.
Thank you. DJ, hold on. Please clap for my boss. This is our legend, our icon. You can take it easy. You know, you've been doing this thing when you were a teenager. You don't owe. When your children know, say, my daddy fall for a living. You see, South Africans, especially your men, they complain always that our Nigerian men take their women. It's not our fault. No, it's not because we have broad shoulders, good-looking guys, no big forehead, and all those kind of stuff. That's not it. Historically speaking, I'm an historian, like I said. There is a reason to this. Historically speaking, and quote, tell me I'm wrong if whatever I'm saying is a lie. 1967, South Africa had a major milestone in medical history. They performed the first successful heart transplant by a South African doctor named Christian Bernard. Is that correct? And the patient was a 53-year-old man named Louis. The heart donor was a 25-young lady who had died, and the heart was still functioning. So the family said, our daughter has always given to the society. Now that she's passed on to glory, we'll donate her heart. And then they donated the heart to Louis, who was 53 years old. The doctor, Christian Bernard, performed this surgery successfully on Louise. Well, Louise, I like the way you are fact checking. You don't even know your country history. You see that? No wonder you say we take your job. You see, I'm the one. You see, this is supposed to be her job. I'm the one researching her country history. When you see me walking in National Library of South Africa, don't be surprised. So like I was saying, when the heart transplant was done successfully, the doctors were happy, became a major milestone in medical history across the world. People knew South Africa for that. The patient woke up, and these were his exact words. He said, oh, I am alive. He was so happy. But something happened. This man will now later die 18 days later. They did an autopsy. They said, why did he die? Is it that the heart stopped functioning? They now did an autopsy and confirmed that the heart was still functioning. What killed Louis was pneumonia, aka cold. That is to say, the first time a South African woman will lay down her life, gave her heart to a South African man, he lacked the capacity to handle it. He died. No wonder they love Nigerian men.
I'm Joycelyn Ella Keche Ada, reporting live for PSN.